The Newark Holy Stones represent one of the most compelling and controversial archaeological mysteries in American history. It was supposedly discovered in the mid-19th century, and these artifacts have sparked debates about their origin, their authenticity, and of course the implications for our understanding of pre-Columbian America. Are these artifacts, the Newark Holy Stones, genuine evidence of ancient transatlantic contact, or are they an elaborate hoax designed to align with 19th century narratives about history and race? To uncover the truth, we're going to try our best to delve into the stones themselves, the context of their discovery, and the heated discussions and debates that they continue to provoke to us today. So this story begins in the 1860s near Newark, Ohio, a region that is infamous for its remarkable prehistoric indigenous American earthworks. These earthworks are particularly extraordinary because they present massive geometric mounds that were attributed to the Hopewell culture who existed here roughly 100 BC to roughly 500 AD. And the Hopewell culture displayed an extraordinary capability of advanced engineering and astronomical alignments, which still puzzles archaeologists and historians alike. So going back to the 1860s, Mr. David Weirich, a Newark-based surveyor and amateur archaeologist, like most archaeologists of his day, because archaeology was relatively a new science, if you will. So David Weirich was excavating a burial mound near the infamous Newark Earthworks when supposedly he made an extraordinary find. And this find was a small wedge-shaped stone known as the Keystone. And the Keystone supposedly bore Hebrew inscriptions on each of its four sides. And the translation of the text revealed phrases such as the law of God, the Holy of Holies, the King of the earth, and the Word of the Lord. The Keystone's inscriptions were remarkable, especially if they were ancient, and Hebrew text in pre-Columbian America would suggest a connection to the old world that is now lost to history. Although, supposedly, it's been found again with the Keystone, right? But this possibility of this thing being real would challenge conventional historical understandings and would lead to intense revelations that we never once understood before, if it were true. And here's the thing that makes it a little bit more speculatory. It's the second artifact that was uncovered. So, mysteriously, later that same year, which I guess it would make sense if you were in the same archaeological site, right? I guess it would kind of make sense, but nonetheless, later that same year, Mr. David Weirich made, of course, an even more astonishing discovery. In another nearby burial mound, he uncovered the infamous Decalogue Stone, a much larger, much more complex artifact. This sandstone tablet featured an image of what we think to be Moses holding the Ten Commandments from the Bible, along with Hebrew text recounting the Decalogue, which is the Ten Commandments, essentially. The stone was housed in a protective sandstone box as well, which indicates great importance, of course, and it would suggest that it had been intentionally preserved and intentionally buried, right? It was meant to be found. And unlike the Keystone, the Decalogue Stone used a different variant of Hebrew script not commonly seen before, lending an air of mystery to its origin. Alright, so let's talk about the Keystone a little bit. So the Keystone is a fairly compact artifact, approximately 6 inches long, and again shaped like an ancient wedge. Its inscriptions were written in a block-style Hebrew script, and it was translated shortly after its discovery, which of course adds a bit of speculation to it, right? It's almost as if it was pre-translated. But the phrases inscribed on it are deeply religious, which invokes themes of divine authority, sacred space, And it would, of course, play right into Manifest Destiny, which was pretty much at its tail end of philosophy at this point in the mid to late 1800s. So the Keystone was also found in soil layers that was, of course, associated with Hopewell burial mounds, and this would have provided enough context to spark debate at the time and even now, which would suggest great age, and it would suggest an ancient connection to a Hebrew society of sorts. So the unusual inscriptions immediately raise these questions. How could Hebrew text appear in a site built centuries before recorded transatlantic contact? Well, the answer is simple, right? They sailed to America. But who knows? Who knows? It's all intrigue. But there is hoax and there is authenticity debates, right? And we're going to go through the intricacies of that. But first, let's talk about the Decalogue Stone, which is far, far more intricate. The Decalogue Stone measures roughly 12 inches by 9 inches, and it depicts a bearded figure, which people have identified as Moses. And it's wearing a flowing robe and holding stone tablets, which are perceived to be an inscription of the Ten Commandments. It's written in a Paleo-Hebrew script, which is pretty interesting. And this script was unfamiliar to many scholars and researchers at the time, but it was later identified as a form consistent with ancient Hebrew styles. The artifact's protective sandstone box is equally intriguing. Its design suggests that the stone was, of course, deliberately buried, possibly as a sacred object meant to be found. However, skeptics argue that the box's construction and preservation are suspiciously convenient for a modern forgery and a modern mythology story, if you will. The Newark Holy Stones were discovered during a period of intense interest in ancient mounds and their builders. Like I said before, I guess I didn't mention it, but pretty much all archaeologists at this point were amateurs. The science was relatively new, and the main archaeological opportunity in America, of course, were the mounds and the prehistoric Native Americans. So that's what was popular at the time for the archaeological world. And in the 19th century, the origin of these earthworks was still a hotly contested topic among these researchers and archaeologists. Many Euro-Americans at the time were reluctant to attribute their construction to indigenous Americans, whose cultures were often dismissed as primitive. Instead, theories proliferated about a quote-unquote lost race of advanced builders. Theories that, of course, conveniently aligned with the colonial European narrative of Manifest Destiny. David Weirich, the discoverer of the stones, was supposedly deeply influenced by these ideas. He was particularly fascinated by the theory that the mounds were built by the lost tribes of Israel, a notion popular among some Christian scholars of the time. This belief may have influenced his interpretation of the artifacts and, according to some critics, his potential role in fabricating them. So let's get into the debate a little bit. Authenticity versus hoax theory. Now, I want to first say that I'm not here to portray my opinion. I will say my opinion, but I'm not here to spew it to you. I want to try my best to portray the information first before I come out with my own opinion. I want you guys to decide. I've never seen the stones in person, so I feel like that is an important factor. I feel like seeing the stones in person would be awesome. It would be an opportunity to really see it for yourself, but there has been a ton of research done on these guys, and who am I to say, though? Who am I to say? So let's get to the debate. Let's do some arguments for authenticity first, just to, positivity first, right? Or I suppose. So, proponents of the stone's authenticity argue that their discovery challenges our understanding of history. If genuine, the stones would, of course, provide evidence of transatlantic contact before Columbus and possibly Jewish land claims by Jewish travelers fleeing persecution or seeking new lands, which we'll delve into this a little bit more later on. Supporters also highlight the craftsmanship of the Decalogue Stone. Its inscriptions and protective box would suggest intentionality and reverence for Moses. We think it's Moses. And the idea that such an artifact could be forged by an amateur seems improbable to some, especially in these times, particularly given the linguistic complexity of the inscriptions and the artifact in itself. Another point in favor of authenticity is the context of the finds. Both stones were discovered in Hopewell burial mounds, which were already considered sacred spaces. And mind you, these people, during this time, thought that these mounds were built by a lost race already. This narrative was already being pushed. So the deliberate placement of the Decalogue Stone in its protective box would suggest a ritual or ceremonial purpose for a lost race or lost civilization of some kind. Now let's get on to the arguments for it being a hoax. So critics point to numerous red flags. The Hebrew inscriptions on both sides show stylistic elements inconsistent with ancient texts, suggesting that they were copied using 19th century knowledge of Hebrew. The Paleo-Hebrew script on the Decalogue Stone, for example, combines features from various time periods, and this would undermine its credibility as being ancient. David Weirick's involvement is another point of contention. As a devout believer in the lost tribes theory, he had a strong motive to find artifacts supporting his views. While there is no direct evidence that Weirick forged the stones, his enthusiasm and the timing of the discoveries does raise some suspicions. And Weirick's death in 1864, of course, didn't help the cause at all. In fact, it made things even a bit more mysterious in a sense, and it kind of propelled the Newark Holy Stones to a new level of fame in a way. The discoverer has died, and these stones were legendary. It added to some of the mystique and mystery, right? Makes sense. Now, I want to cover one more possibility, and it's a bit more optimistic, I suppose. It kind of leans on both it being a fake and a legitimate artifact. What if it's possible that one of these artifacts is real and the other is fake? How crazy would that be? It would be almost ironic if he had found a legitimate artifact and was looking to add mystique to that legitimate artifact, because if he did find the Keystone first, the Keystone's not really that crazy, right? I mean, yeah, it is definitely riveting. It's an amazing artifact. It is crazy. But it's not as crazy as the Decalogue Stone, right? So what if it's possible that the Keystone could be legitimate? It could be a legitimate trade item, potentially, between Native Americans and ancient Jewish people who potentially inhabited the United States at the time in small bands. And what if David Weirick was trying to push the Keystone and he was having issues pushing the narrative of the Keystone, a potentially legitimate artifact? And what if he made the Decalogue Stone as a result of that to try and add mystique and add a little bit of fame to his truth? Now, I'm not saying by any means this is true. This is literally just a theory. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and delve into some of the possibilities of how or why ancient Jewish people, ancient Israelites, would come to America. So if the stones, or potentially one of the stones, are in fact genuine, how might ancient Jewish people might have arrived in the Americas, and why? Well, one theory states that Jewish travelers, possibly from the time of King Solomon, could have possibly sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. Ancient Phoenicians, renowned seafarers, and close allies of the Israelites might have facilitated such a voyage. And the Phoenicians were capable of long-distance navigation that we know of in the Mediterranean Sea, and they had the skills to definitely cross vast oceans. Another possibility could involve Jewish groups fleeing persecution during the Babylonian exile. Seeking refuge, they might have ventured westward, eventually reaching the Americas. And while no direct evidence supports these theories, Proponents argue that ancient maritime capabilities and the discovery of the Newark Holy Stones suggest such journeys might have occurred. And there is other evidence of other societies coming to the Americas before pre-Columbian contact, and those are for other videos. But as for the stones' age, the estimates vary. If tied to the Hopewell culture, they would date back approximately 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. However, critics argue that the stones show no definitive signs of such age, with their inscriptions appearing too modern to align with this timeline. Now, I've never seen the stones in person, but they are in a museum in Ohio, and I do plan on checking them out and getting them on video one day. I do think seeing them in person is important for a more definitive answer, at least for me personally, of course. It's always led for interpretation for you guys, and I'm trying my best to portray the information from an unbiased standpoint as best as I can. I know sometimes my theories do bleed through a little bit, but hopefully they don't too much. So today the Newark Holy Stones are, like I said, housed in that museum in Ohio, and they continue to intrigue visitors like myself, and probably like you guys. Scholars and enthusiasts still remain divided even though they sit in a museum. While mainstream archaeologists generally regard the stones as hoaxes, they still provoke questions about our understanding of history and the biases of 19th century archaeology and mindset. And the links to which individuals might go to shape historical narratives is also pretty prevalent in this situation, because if you think about it, both sides are trying to push their historical narrative. Thank you guys very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new. Don't forget to hit that like button if you really enjoyed, and comment and let me know what you think about the Newark Holy Stones. Hopefully one day we'll be able to take a visit to the museum here and show these stones off and everything else in the museum in person, or at least on video for you guys, in person for me, right? But anyways, that's going to be it for me. I love you guys so very much, and I'm out of here. It's been Doogie, and you guys have a blessed one. Peace.